Hello, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm sorry about the rain, although it seemed to have stopped for the moment. For those of you who don't know me, I am Julie Rovner. I'm Chief Washington Correspondent at KFF Health News and host of our weekly health podcast, What the Health. I consider myself exceptionally well qualified to moderate this panel on the second 50 midlife and beyond, if only because I am well into my second 50 and have been actively pondering all of the questions that we are about to address. I am honored to be joined by an all-star panel of experts about aging in America. I'm going to try hard to not actively fangirl during this session. Leading us off to frame our conversation is Deb Whitman, Chief Public Policy Officer at AARP, former staff director for the Senate Special Committee on Aging, and most important for the purposes of this conversation, author of the forthcoming book, The Second 50, Answers to the 7 Big Questions of Midlife and Beyond. She will be followed by Nadine Gracia, President and CEO of the Trust for America's Health, a nonprofit, nonpartisan public health policy research and advocacy organization. Before joining TIFA, Dr. Gracia was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Minority Health and Director of the Office of Minority Health at the Department of Health and Human Services during the Obama administration. See, I told you these people were really well qualified. Then we have Cheryl Woodson, who has taught and practiced geriatric medicine and serves as a public policy advocate and managed care expert for nearly 40 years while raising a family and caring for a parent with dementia. And then joining us finally is Dr. Mark Friedman, founder and co-CEO of Co-Generate, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing generations together to address societal problems, and a lecturer at the Yale School of Management. So we're going to chat for about a half an hour, and then we will open it up to questions. But Deb, why don't you start us off by telling us about the book and what are the 7 questions that you pose?
Well, first I need a survey, because we haven't actually released the book. It's not till September 10th, so you are my first focus group. So raise your hand if you're in your second 50. All right, raise your hand if you want to be in your second 50. All right, so what I'm seeing is pretty much everybody is either wants to be eventually in their second 50 or is already. That means book sales will be good. And our AARP Foundation, who gets all the money for the book sales, will be very happy. But I'll tell you why I wrote this. So as you heard from Julie, I've been working on aging for the last 25 years. And then I was hitting 50 myself. And I realized I had a shelf full of books on what to expect when you're expecting from when I had my kids. They were headed off to college, so I had all of the college prep books, but I couldn't find out what to expect for your aging. And more important, even though I realized I'd been working on this for 25 years, there was a lot I didn't know. I had a lot of questions. And so I wrote down, what is it that I want to know about my second half of life? And I wrote the questions, how long will I live? Will I be healthy? Will I lose my memory? Will I have enough money? How long will I work? Where am I going to live? And how will I die? And so that's how I broke up the book. Actually, I wrote a few more, but they wouldn't fit in the book. So maybe there'll be a sequel if people like it. But I learned a lot. I did a lot of research. I'm an economist by training, so there's 1,000 footnotes, but don't let that scare you. They're all just in the back, so you know that it's well-researched. I interviewed amazing people and asked them who knew much more than I did about different issues. And then I talked to people all over the country to hear what their second 50 was like. I want to just ground set today's conversation with a little bit of what I learned about the first question, how long will I live? Because I wanted to know, why do some people live longer than others? And so here's some good facts for you. Women across the globe live 3 to 7 years longer than men. Now, part of that difference is biology. Part of it is men do have more wars, and they actually don't go to doctors as much. But if you took out that gendered behavior, there's still about a year difference just from biology between men and women in life expectancy. People with a college education live 7 years longer than people with just a high school education. 7 years. And life expectancy, as we know, varies a lot by race and ethnicity. Asian Americans live on average 83 and a half years, Well, Native Americans only make it to 65, which I'll remind you, Social Security age is coming to 67. Income plays a huge role, very correlated with education, obviously, but the top 1% of men live 10 years longer than the bottom 1%. And women, men is 15 years, women it is 10 years. I have my cards, so I don't mess up the numbers, but I still can. So there's huge disparities by income in how we live. And geography plays a role. Perhaps more than your genetic code is your zip code in deciding how long you're going to live. We are here in Pitkin County, which isn't the highest life expectancy in the country. It's actually where Breckenridge is. It's in Summit County, Colorado, and that has the highest life expectancy in all of the United States. The lowest life expectancy by county is in the Ogallala County, just south of the Black Hills in North Dakota, and there's a 20-year difference if you just drive from Breckenridge to Ogallala land. And while lifespans were dropping even before the pandemic hit in the United States, due to deaths and despair, rise in opioids, what I am more worried about is while we have been gaining in life expectancy, those all have not been healthy years. So between the year 2000 and 2015, life expectancy in the United States increased by 2 years, but our health span, or how many years we're healthy, was only 4 months. So most of those 2 years increase in life expectancy weren't all healthy. All right, so I am gonna just lay that out there. I'm sure you probably did the math of like, okay, I'm a woman, I have an education, I live in Colorado, you can't add necessarily all of those things up. But I'll talk a little bit later, hopefully if we have time, about things that you can do to increase your lifespan and health span, but hopefully that gives us something to talk about today.
So here's a question that we can hear from the rest of the panel. We all know that aging is not a single story. It encompasses a complex array of outcomes based on factors, as Deb just said, including where you live, your level of education, your income, and more. As Deb points out in the book, we cannot talk about aging in America as though it's a single story. When it comes to growing older, there are many different Americas. So given all of these things, are there some through lines about what aging looks like in America today? And what's the prism that you view it through? Cheryl, you're on the end. Why don't you go ahead?
My prism is that age is not a disease. I'm almost 70 years old. I have a second-degree black belt, and I have a 97-year-old aunt who taught 3 line dancing classes before the pandemic. To me, aging is not what you can't do; it's what you don't have to do anymore. We tend to focus in the professional aging community on the challenges, and we need to do that. But if we meet those challenges, all of those people are going to be healthy. We have to have something for them to do too. So I think the most ageist people in this country are older adults. Many older adults just decide there's stuff they should not do, stuff that they're not allowed to do, and many just stop. And the depression and isolation comes from their own not being willing to go out in the world. Now, aging is not a disease, but it is not optional. You know, you do have to do things differently. I had a pastor tell me that when you're a young basketball player, you drive to the hoop. When you're older, you develop a fadeaway jump shot, you still score. So it's really important as we age to look up and look at what we can do. And I think that as aging professionals, we need to give that story a lot more. As we're giving the stories of what's going wrong, we have to point out what doesn't go wrong.
That's great.
Mark?
Well, I'm a big Steph Curry fan, so I love that last analogy. I was listening to the New York Times Daily last week, and they were talking about young people who are trying to retire in their 20s and that they were aspiring to the freedom from work. But when I talk to older people, they're looking for the freedom to work in new ways, to new ends. But I think that I think there's 2 big mismatches that older people, and really people of all ages, are confronting today. One is that we've got this old lockstep life course of school, work, retirement that was concocted for a period when people lived not too long into the second 50. And as people are living longer and longer, and as we aspire to help them live longer and healthier, we need a new map of life that's fitted to the new length of life. And I think what we're seeing is the creation of a new stage of life between the middle years and anything resembling old age. And it's like the creation of adolescence 100 years ago. But we're just not set up for that. And the other thing we're not set up for is that we live in what's arguably the most age-segregated society in human history. At the same time, we are now the most age-diverse society on record. And those two things are feeding conflict and misunderstanding and loneliness. And so I think these two big mismatches need to get resolved if we're going to make the most of longer lives in an age-diverse society.
So it's really great to be on this panel and having this discussion. I come to this discussion with a public health perspective and a health equity perspective. You know, Deb talked about in particular how life expectancy has increased, where we've seen some dips and declines, and where there are actually differences in life expectancy across a number of factors. And what we know is that that increase in life expectancy, that increase in longevity, that public health has contributed greatly to seeing that over the decades, over centuries, really, with regards to increases in life expectancy. And so the goal really is to then say it's not only the increase in life expectancies, how do we actually have healthy aging, to the point that she was raising around assuring that everyone can age healthily and has the opportunity to do so. And I would say the way that actually our organization even came into this space of aging was because we recognized that public health actually had a limited involvement in healthy aging. It was really more so healthcare, the aging services sector, social services, and others who were engaged in really helping to support the health and well-being of older adults. And while those sectors are critically important, public health really needed to play a more active role with regards to healthy aging. And so it was actually in bringing together experts in healthcare and public health and academia, community leaders, and older adults themselves that we really identified that, yes, there is a place for public health to be at the table in terms of creating this opportunity for everyone to have the opportunity to age healthily, to have independence, and recognize that that's different for every person. But that what we would be looking at is then how do we create the community conditions to actually promote healthy aging? And how do we look at the long-standing structural and systemic barriers that far too many people experience, such that by the time you become an older adult, the disparities are already present? And so how do we actually help look at this across a life course from the beginning of life to older adulthood, such that everyone has that opportunity?
That's such a good segue into my next question, which is for Mark. You've dedicated your career to the concept of intergenerational cooperation, yet America is more divided today than we've been perhaps since the 1850s, according to some people. How can people of different ages work together better to help mend some of our other social problems?
Well, some encouraging news is that with support from AARP and others, we did a survey of older and younger people with the NORC at the University of Chicago about a year and a half ago, and we asked older and younger people whether they wanted to come together and work on these big issues, and the answer was a resounding yes. And one of the for older people, the issue they most wanted to work with younger people on was climate and the environment. And for young people, it was mental health. One of the things that struck us is that the level of interest on the part of young people and young people of color was twice the level of interest in older people. So in some ways, this is a call to come together that's coming from younger generations. And at a time when we're seeing a lot of signs of resilience, there's been a fourfold increase in multi-generational housing since the 1970s, driven by immigrant families, communities of color, and to a significant extent. So I see some real possibilities, but right now it's too much of a do-it-yourself process. We've essentially, like I was saying before, set society up to drive a wedge between generations, and it wasn't a nefarious plot. Things like child labor laws and universal schooling of young people to be with other young people, Social Security, which I think is the great triumph of American policy, though, had as a goal moving older people out of the labor market. And then we invented one after another set of institutions, senior centers, retirement communities that put elders into the sidelines of society. And we just need to disrupt these institutions and create institutions that fit with this desire on the part of many people to come together about these new demographics.
Do you think that they can help sort of lead people, as we say, to overcome other kinds of differences?
I do, and I think that there's a real, I feel like one of the lessons I've learned over all these years doing this work is that the needs and the assets of the generations fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Arthur Brooks, who's talked here before, wrote a book, Strength to Strength, a few years ago, and talked about young people as being particularly strong in fluid intelligence and older people in crystallized intelligence. BMW did a study of 3 assembly lines, one just of older workers, one of younger, and the mixed line far outperformed the others. So I think that this is something that's waiting and wanting to happen, but it can't be a do-it-yourself project.
Nadine, I want you to expand for a minute on what you were talking about before. We know, obviously, that health inequity is a huge and growing problem in this country. And as you said, as people age, some of those inequities actually get more extreme because they build on each other. What can we do to start to turn that trend around?
Yeah, Julie, I think it's so important to say it's not at age 50 or at age 65 that the disparities started, right? You can look at, as Deb was describing, where people are born, where they grow, where they work, where they live, where kids play, where people age, that those social determinants of health really are so critical with regards to understanding health and well-being. And when we think about disparities, there can be this cumulative impact and even an intergenerational impact that populations and communities experience, and it's far too many communities of color, people who live in low-income communities, people who come from immigrant families, certain immigrant families where they have less access to opportunity, people with disabilities and others. And so when we think about the conditions and really how to address disparities, it's how do we actually look at issues like food and nutrition security, housing stability, and having access to affordable housing, which is so critically important to being able to thrive and be healthy, and understanding that older adults are not a burden on society. Older adults are part of how we thrive as society. And so when we think about all of the needs that older adults may have, whether that's in terms of transportation, not only to be able to get to health care appointments, but also to be able to get to older adult centers or other opportunities to engage and have those opportunities for social connection, we can build and design communities to be age-friendly. And that's the movement that we at Trust for America's Health are currently a part of, which is this age-friendly ecosystem. How do we truly build an ecosystem across health systems, public health, communities, workplaces, universities, and others, to be able to say that we truly have age-friendly communities where we don't see the ageism that still exists in terms of not having access to opportunity, but that also we're actually seeing older adults as part of the way in which we thrive as a society. So our role and what we're doing in the public health space is leading the age-friendly public health systems movement that centers equity. It says, first, we have to actually know and understand the communities that we're actually serving. And so part of what we've done is really work to elevate healthy aging as a core function of health departments, governmental public health specifically, and local and state and territorial tribal health departments. And what we saw, and those of you that work intimately in public health know that a lot of the resources and funding for public health are often disease-specific. And while that's important to be able to address various diseases, the challenge is that there's not that flexible type of core funding that's more cross-cutting to look at an issue like healthy aging. And so we provided an initial set of resources to be able to help public health departments, and we started with a pilot of them to say, how can we actually help health departments be able to become age-friendly? And we started in the state of Florida, working with the state health department in Florida that then was helping us to work with county health departments. And the first thing we found was that there wasn't even data available on the older adults being served in the community in a way that it could help to actually tailor and design the types of programs and policies that would help to promote older adult health and well-being. In just that pilot project, by providing not even a significant amount of resources, county health departments, the state health departments, developed these data dashboards, and they disaggregated the data, not just by race and ethnicity, but looking at it in a broader, more holistic context. What are the poverty levels? What are the access to housing? What are the job opportunities? To really paint a picture of what are the assets and what are also the disparities that we see, so that we can then develop the types of programs and opportunities that are going to allow everyone to have the opportunity to be healthy and thrive. And that is now spreading to more health departments across the country, both state and local health departments. But we need that kind of sustained investment and resource to give the opportunity. You know, COVID-19, as devastating as it was for the older adult population because of the disproportionate impact on older adults, it was also a catalyst to say we have to do better to be prepared to help really support a population that, one, is a critical part of our society, and two, has greater needs as it comes to older age.
So you're the population health expert here. Cheryl, you're the actual practicing geriatrician. What advice would you give someone turning 50 today as they contemplate their next 30, 40, 50 years?
The first thing is to partner with a strong primary care team, a healthcare team that can look at your history, your family history, and set up protections for you against the conditions that might keep you from living out loud and aging excellently, so that you can have the proper prevention and immunizations and screenings and surveillance and treatments and whole lifestyle support for keeping yourself healthy. I think that's the number one thing. Now, when I interviewed my 97-year-old Aunt Terry and her 103-year-old friend, Miss Edna, about what they thought, what I think is second is what they thought was first, and that was manage your money. Find a certified financial planner who can today tell you how to adjust your spending, your saving, investing, insurance coverage, so that you can fund the lifestyle you want later on. The third thing is to keep active, keep your mind active, keep your body active, and I think active in things that are outside of your workplace, outside of your family. You know, and I know you're busy and it may only be a half hour a month, but you have to get used to putting yourself out there and being in situations where you meet new people. Because as we age, our cohort shrinks. Mm-hmm. People move, they get estranged from us, they get disabled, they pass. And if you're not used to putting yourself out there to meet new people of all ages, that's when the isolation happens. And you can't just all of a sudden do that at 65. You have to put yourself in a position to go out of your comfort zone and to meet new people all the time. And I think those are the three most important things.
Mm-hmm. Deb, you can't turn on a TV or pick up a magazine, to the extent we still have magazines, without seeing stories about or ads for companies touting projects and services to extend longevity, mostly aimed at the wealthy. What's your perspective on this whole live forever movement? And should everyone have access to these innovations, or should we better spend our efforts making the lifespans that we have better?
Very good questions, and yes, there's huge amounts of money pouring into what's known as geroscience, the science of how do we extend our health span longer. And a lot of that money is coming from Silicon Valley, it's coming from Saudi Arabia and different places. And there is some really good animal models that are showing the ability for different types of interventions that can extend lifespan. The question is, how are we measuring what it does? Is it substantial enough that it's going to actually have an impact? Are we looking at the different causes of aging? So one of the reasons that people have shorter lives is due to the stress of systemic racism. That's one of the reasons that people age faster. Are we exploring that in our science in the same way we're exploring across the population? Will these treatments be afforded for everybody? Or will they be so expensive like they are now, really targeted at sort of the very upper class who are already living 10 to 15 years longer, depending on your gender? All of those things I think we really need to have deeper conversations about. That said, I would like to propose that we can do things to extend our health span and lifespan without taking a pill and paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. So a lot of research has gone into just doing 5 healthy habits. If you eat right, you exercise, you maintain your weight, you don't smoke, and you drink little to nothing, that actually, you live 14 years longer as a woman and 12 years longer as a man. And even if you do 4 out of 5 of those, your health span gives you 8 to 10 more years of healthy life expectancy. Now, my dad does not eat well. He is overweight. He does not exercise. He smoked when he was young and loves a good Jim Beam every night. But he has another protective factor in what Cheryl was talking about. He is very tied to his community. He can spend an hour a day picking up his mail because he talks to every single person that comes in. And we know from research that just avoiding this social isolation that Cheryl was talking about, social isolation can shorten your lifespan by about 15 years. And our Surgeon General has done really good work on this, as well as his staff, who some of them are here. So there are things that we can do, and I'll just throw one other in there. If you think about aging, and you picture being old as a time of being decrepit, of it being a miserable existence, that you think aging is negative, actually that has huge impacts on your own health and longevity. Mm-hmm. If you have a positive view on aging, you're gonna live 7.5 years longer. You're gonna have fewer strokes and heart attacks, and you reduce your risk of cognitive decline and dementia. What really stunned me was when they measured people's views on what aging was going to look like for themselves, and then did brain scans years later. They actually found that the people with more negative stereotypes had 3 times as many plaques, and their brain volume was smaller. So when we say our mind matters in our health, both in our social connections and how we view our future, those things, to me, are things that we can act on and that help people across the population, and we don't have to spend trillions of healthcare dollars in order to do it. It's tangible and it's real. So we need to tamp down aging, connect with each other, and try to live as healthy as we can.
Julie, can I follow up?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is already a theory and a practice of improving life expectancy and health. It's called preventative medicine. Mm-hmm. And it isn't paid for. I mean, you can get your leg amputated and be on dialysis, but you can't get a nutritionist and a physical therapist or somebody to help you be better. We still live and train our healthcare professionals in an acute care model. And we're so busy trying to keep people from dying that we don't think about how to help them live with chronic conditions. And so we need to change our focus from a disease focus to a life focus, as well as, doing all the prevention that we're talking about.
And Julie, if I can add just on the, yes. That collaboration then too between what public health and healthcare can do in terms of primary care, and then thinking about that upstream prevention is having the ability to actually have access to affordable, healthy foods, where we know, for example, and we saw even in the pandemic, but it predated the pandemic, households of color, Black and Latino households, Native American households, higher rates of food and nutrition insecurity, which raises risk of a whole host of diet-related diseases. Or when you look at issues around even workers and older adults who continue to be in the workforce, Black and Latino older adults are more likely to have higher costs in terms of the treatment costs, as well as lost wages because of chronic diseases, and have higher rates of chronic diseases. And when we look at really the root causes and upstream factors, so much of that ties to the community conditions, the social and economic conditions, and how do we actually create healthy, thriving, resilient communities so that people have access to be able to walk, bike, engage in physical activity because their neighborhoods are safe, that they have jobs that actually pay them a livable wage, and that provide them with sick leave so that they aren't concerned that if they don't go to work when they're sick, that they will lose their job or lose income. These are the stressors. And then when you compound that, as Deb was speaking to, if you compound that then too with the enduring impacts of racism and discrimination, that too has cellular impacts on individuals that can also increase risk, inflammation, chronic diseases. So there's a host of things each of us in all of our sectors have a role to play to truly see this healthy, thriving opportunity for older adults in our country.
I'm curious, one of the themes that I've heard in a number of panels just in the last day is of community, active neighborhoods. We've also talked so much about kids, young people, and social media. I'm wondering if that's different for older people in social media. I know from my point of view, I'm still sort of dazzled that I can keep up with friends from elementary school and high school and college and my various hobbies, and I'll see them every 6 months, but I know exactly what they're doing. I mean, is this a way do you think older Americans can make better use of this with fewer bad outcomes than probably kids and people with not fully developed personalities?
I think absolutely. The problem is access. There are a lot of resources that are now going online, but if people aren't online, that's a problem. But there are many churches that I know that have tech cafes where the kids come and the older adults come and learn how to do things. And I think it's entirely possible, and that's a place where the intergenerational thing can happen. And it helps the kids too, because if they are going to take care of us, they can't just think of us as decrepit, horrible people. They have to have positive experiences with us. And their parents are working themselves to death. Their grandparents are in Florida. They need some wisdom.
Yeah.
So that will be another good place for older adults and younger adults to get together.
Well, I'll just jump in there because as we were talking, I was thinking that the real fountain of youth is the fountain with youth. And the Harvard study of adult development, which focused so much on purpose and connection as being keys, found that older people who connect with support, do exactly what you were describing, were 3 times as likely to be happy as those who failed to do so. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom to what you're saying.
And can I just point out, actually, when we look at happiness over the course of your life, it used to be a U-shaped curve, that people were happy when they were younger, less so in their 40s. And we've seen studies that they're twice as happy in their 80s. And in fact, if you self-ask them, are you healthy? Yes, I'm healthy. Do you have chronic conditions? Yes, I have chronic conditions. But I'm healthier than, I am healthy as I can be in this moment. That U-shape is changing not because older people are less happy, but because we have an adolescent mental health crisis in this country, and the numbers of regarding happiness at younger ages is falling, unfortunately. And I'll just say another thing about technology. There's a somewhat ageist stereotype that older people can't use technology. I mean, again, we saw during the pandemic, people learned. And one of the problems is broadband access and the expense of it for people on fixed incomes. But AARP also has a technology training program, and we train thousands of people how to use different technologies. And people can learn at every age. They may not be digital natives, and they may not know every emoji and what they mean. I admit when I try not to use them too much with my college-age kids, but not to send them something that they shouldn't get from their mother. But people can learn, and we saw huge rates of technological use during the pandemic. It just may take 1 or 2 more times to show somebody. You just have to have some patience.
Well, before we run out of time, I want to turn it over to the audience. There are folks with microphones, so please wait until somebody gets to you with a microphone. In the back.
Hi, guys. Thanks for doing this. Cheryl, I have a feeling this is going to be a question for you, but I'd love to hear what any of you has to say about it. Can you say something about the importance of faith for people as they age?
That's a hard question for me because I couldn't survive without it. So for me, it's been a problem, a support. But since I was a baby, I don't know that it's different with age. There may be some data on that. But the churches are a place where things happen. Things happen without funding, without organization. There's a church on the south side of Chicago that brings in fresh vegetables every Friday and Saturday from May to September. They call it by any greens necessary. There are people that bring in fresh produce after church services all year round. I mean, I think that faith-based communities have a lot of strength, but I think the whole issue about whether faith sustains you is true for kids, to me, as it is for other people. But there may be some data that says something else.
There's a lot of data on having purpose, and which faith can give you. But purpose can come from all kinds of different things that you find value in. I also know it's a way that many people stay connected as they age and get mutual support and give support, and that gives them purpose. So there's good data on that.
Who else? Run down here. Where are our microphone runners? We're down here in the front.
Hi. Do you mind if I give this is my question. Do you mind if I give my short opinion about aging?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think aging is all about managing your achy bones. And the minute when you turn 70, if you died tomorrow, no one will accuse you of dying young. And also, when you wake up in the morning and you're pain-free, you're grateful, because before 70, you take it for granted. So, and I also think that another thing about aging is that by the time you're 70, you learn to live with yourself and you're happy in your own company.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to be lonely. And there are many 20 and 30-year-olds that are lonely. Anyway, that was a joke.
Let me just
Thank you for that.
say something about twinges and the hinges. Okay, I've done high-intensity interval training. I was having some problem with my hip, and I went into ortho, and the person I wanted to see had a reputation as a sports medicine person. And his receptionist said he wouldn't see me because I was over 60.
Oh.
And I called the office manager and told them this is blatant discrimination that leaves you open to EEO problems. And, you get to see whoever you want, but you can't do it by age. He can say, I want people whose epiphyses haven't closed, or people who have athlete-level function, but you can't do it by age. But this happened 2 months ago. So aging, even within the health system, is a big, big problem. Were you seen? Not by him. I had to get seen by somebody else, but I spoke on it loud.
We have a question way down here in the front.
Hi, what's your opinion about older adult communities? Because we've talked about how important it is not to be socially isolated, but by the same token, there's not diversity.
Yeah, well, I think housing in general played an outsized role in getting us into this mess we have now around age segregation, age apartheid, and age diversity. But it wasn't a nefarious plot. Like I was saying before, when you look at the beginnings of older housing communities, they were really designed to solve the two big problems that we're talking about today, which is purpose and connection. At a time when, in mid-century, Walter Reuther got up in front of the UAW and described older people as too old to work, too young to die. We were a society obsessed with young people throwing older people to the sidelines. And these communities, really, I think initially they were solving the community question. But they were also solving another question in a society that hated older people. If everybody was old, then nobody was old. The first age-segregated retirement community was called Youngtown. And it was created by a guy who was a socialist who was trying to create a kibbutz for older people where they could go and have an identity and connection. And I think they still meet many of those needs. It's just we can't cordon off people of different ages. And I see a lot of creative things happening. So I'll tell this quick story. I've been going a lot to a place on the Arizona State University campus called Mirabella, which Michael Crow, the president of ASU, opened just before the pandemic, and he said it was going to be the coolest dorm in the world. Older people who wanted to learn have free reign at ASU. And that sounded great. Pandemic happens, they fill up, and then the pandemic recedes, and it turns out they're right across the street from Shady Park, the most beloved electronic music club in Tempe, and this music-based generational war breaks out. You know, it's like, turn your damn music down. Why are these older people ruining the campus? But then I went and I lived on this hall at Mirabella, which is a mix of older people who love music and young graduate students of music, all musicians of color, to answer your earlier question. And it's an intergenerational musical utopia that's characterized by proximity, purpose, and partnership. A lot of these older and younger musicians are actually playing together. So I think even within, you know, sometimes I think we got to blow up senior housing, but I think that there's so many creative things we can do within the current structure that can bring generations together, foment the understanding and connection, and make the most of this multi-generational opportunity.
And I'll say there's a movement on villages, which is not the village people, but it's communities that come together so that people can age in place and share services and help each other, and it forms like a tight network. Most people, if you ask them where do you want to age, they want to age in the house that they've got. They don't necessarily want to move, but they don't necessarily have friends or family nearby. So these types of things are popping up more and more. I just found out there's 30 in the county that I live in, Maryland, alone. So if you're interested, it's they're called villages. It started in Beacon Hill, just inside of Boston, and all across the country, these types of neighbors getting together to help each other or getting together.
I'd also just add that we should really capitalize on the strength of the diversity of our society, in that the cultural diversity of our society, in that the various cultures actually look at aging and may look at aging in different ways. And there are things that can be learned from other cultures, even within the United States, about approaches on aging, whether it's respect of older adults and the role that older adults have in the family, in the society, and in community. And I think that exists, when you look at certain communities of color, that exists among certain immigrant communities. I myself am the daughter of Haitian immigrants and grew up in a multi-generational household, and that's one of the greatest blessings I've ever had in my life, was to have my grandmother, my uncles, and everyone feel like they were raising me. But what I learned from them, it was instrumental to my upbringing. One of the things that we're actually doing with the state of Washington and the Washington State Department of Health is actually the first time working specifically with tribal entities and learning with regards to how tribes actually support elders. And I learned this very early on when I began my work in health equity and health disparities. When you see one tribe, you know one tribe, because there are over hundreds of tribes in the nation. But specifically was to understand and build a framework of healthy aging as it relates to tribes. And now working with the Northwest Washington Indian Health Board that is creating that framework of healthy aging that applies specifically, that embraces the cultural strengths, the assets, and recognizes the health needs and challenges that tribal older adults experience. So I think that's also important, is for us to also understand that even though there are some commonalities, if we look at it at the aggregate, there also is really a richness in the diversity and how we look at aging across the nation.
More? Couple in the back.
Thanks for the enlightening discussion. Two factors you haven't discussed, and one is choosing your parents wisely. That is genetics, and all of the factors that you have discussed. How importantly can they overcome your genetic setup for life expectancy? And the other question would be, a lot is written about having pets to extend life expectancy. I'd like your opinion on both of those.
So genetics plays about 20% of a role in your life expectancy, healthcare 20%, and the other are the social determinants of health. So it plays a role, particularly if your parents are super long-lived. So after 90, 100, then genetics really kicks in, but before that, it's a relatively small compared to these other components. Pets can help you with isolation. Right? It doesn't have to be, if you have something that you care about, and again, loneliness is a sense of, I don't have connections that I want to have. And having something that loves you and that you can love back, whether it's an individual or a pet, can play a big role.
It also helps with your mobility. You
It
you have
does,
to get
yeah.
out and walk, but it also gives a sense of purpose that you're
Yes,
taking
all of
care of.
those.
Yeah, actually, I can add to this. I compete my dogs in
yeah.
obedience and agility. And when I went to my first national competition, I looked around the room. There were 400 people there. They were probably 80% women between the ages of 50 and 80. It's just, these are what older women do. Their kids go off to college and they leave, and they're, they may be retired or they may be working part-time, and they want to get out and do things, and they get a dog and they get really active. I think, oh, I'm so old to be taking up agility, which is such a very difficult and athletic sport, and I am not very good at it. And I'll think, I'm younger of a lot of the cohort that I'm competing against. There are women in their 80s and 90s who are doing this. It's pretty impressive. Go ahead.
Thanks. Hey, Julie. We've talked about drugs. We've talked a little bit about rock and roll. Let's talk about sex.
I knew you were going to ask me
I
that.
was going to do that too.
The minute I saw your mic.
There's a program that I do on how to date safely over 60 on the internet. And I also gave a program called Viagra, What About Us? And it talked about the sexual changes, physiologic changes in men and women that are actually opposite, because Mother Nature doesn't care once you can't reproduce. We care. So there are a lot of things that can be done differently. I mean, again, it's about creativity and stick-to-itiveness. But it is very, very easy if you have a partner that's communicating with well, and that you don't fall into blaming each other for things that are actually Mother Nature's fault. I think you can have a very, very rewarding sexual life. Now, one of the problems I had in practice was I treated a lot of herpes, a lot of people with chlamydia, a lot of people with gonorrhea, because people felt that if they weren't going to get pregnant, they didn't need to be safe. Not true, folks. Not true.
Yeah. Have sex, but do it safely.
Yes, definitely have sex. Do it
We have
safely.
time for one or two more here.
So you all have had such impressive careers in the past, and now you're talking about the next 50. So I'm really curious, what are you excited about for your next second 50 for yourself?
She's stolen my last question, so we'll take it one at a time.
I write romance fiction for women over 50. One is out already, and it got a national award. I'm working on number 2. It's called What the Mirror Sees, and the tag is, you can pretend, but you can't hide from what the mirror sees. And I'm working on the Sounds of Cajun Spice now, so I'm writing. But I'm also doing a lot of presentations in the community about how to be a silver fox. And I'm doing presentations on teaching people fall prevention. Like put on my exercise stuff and bring my little resistance stuff and teach fall prevention with resistance training. So those are the things I'm happy about.
I'm excited to publish my first book in a month.
Holding it up. It's your first book.
I'm really interested in school for the second half of life. I'm starting a new program at Yale that is for people in the 50-plus years to come back to school for a year, but to do it in a more affordable way. There's a bunch of very expensive and quite wonderful programs to do that. But I'd like to see us come up with a new pattern for education that's fitted to these much longer lives. It doesn't make any sense to shoehorn all your education in your first 25 years and then live for 75 years off of that. But we got to democratize it, and Deb has an idea in her book, which we worked on together, which is about taking an early year of Social Security in your 50s or 60s to go back to school for a year. It would be like a GI Bill for elders to reinvest in their human and social capital. But best of all, I think it would transform higher education from an institution just for the young to one for people of all ages.
That's I'm looking forward to continuing to create ladders of opportunity, because It's my way of giving back for the gratitude of the investment that's been made in me, so creating and continuing to create ladders of opportunity for others. And I would say also to really breaking down the silos between various sectors so that we can truly, truly see health and resilience in our nation and really around the world. So.
I could go on for another couple of hours.
What are
but-
you excited about?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, what am
You
I
have to answer
excited
the
about?
question.
I'm excited about teaching people about health policy. I actually am still very motivated by my own work, so I'm going to keep at it for at least another couple of years. All right, now we are out of time. Thank you to the panel. This was great. I could go on for another few hours, and I might later on. So thank you to the audience.
It's fun.